Hey there, folks. I'm Matt Hansen,
And I'm John Johnson.
and you're listening to Planes, Trains, and Comic Books, the podcast where we discuss favorites we've reread, comics we want to read, and everything in between.
And here's the comic we picked this week.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of
Planes, Trains, and Comic
Books. We got an interesting one today. I was going to say a fun one because it's called Fun Home, but we decided to do this one to celebrate Pride Month. And, I picked this one because when I worked at the comic store, I kept hearing about this book. And this book came out when I just got back into comics. And like everybody was talking about it. So from 2006, it's the Alison Bechdel book called Fun Home. And it's like a graphic memoir. So it's like graphic novel memoir of her life.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'd heard her name, but I wasn't familiar with this specific one. Heard the Bechdel test. So
right.
Reading a little bit more into her, and then when we get into this, I was like, oh wow, like okay, so like this is literally her backstory on it.
Yeah, I did not know that. I did not know that about her, or like the Bechdel test and everything until you said that. And I'm like, oh, I've heard of that. I just didn't know it was referencing her.
I think I'd heard of it, and then Rick and Morty this season mentioned it too, and I was like, oh okay, yeah, and it's like this is kind of like a
and if it's been in Rick and Morty, then, John knows about it. So.
No, but we wanted to check this one out because, like Matt said, this was very highly well thought of, and I mean they
made a play about it. It had a bunch of stuff going for it. I mean, I think it's won lots of awards. It was, I mean, this was like, I'm trying to think. This was like considered like maybe not Mouse level, but like Mouse is another graphic novel but it's about the Holocaust. It was on that level of like, here's an indie graphic novel that like will give you the experience of someone that we don't hear a lot about. And it's kind of groundbreaking in that way. So we read it. First off, just going forward, John, what did you think?
Well, I think it's all in the title. It was a family tragicomic is what you called it, yes. I think. And I mean, it sort of was. It definitely there were a couple parts that, like you said, we were talking about this earlier, and like I laughed and I was like, I hope that was the intention. And I was like, well, yeah, it's there's comedic antidotes within this wild story, and I mean, yeah, all in all,
and it seemed kind of wild. Like it felt to me, like especially at the beginning, a bit like I was watching Royal Tenenbaums or something. Like every member of the family had like an interesting quirk or thing, especially as you went into it more. Like everybody had like a thing, or like stuff was going on.
By the second chapter, I felt like I was reading a long episode of 6 Feet Under, one of my favorite TV shows.
Right, yeah.
We'll get into it. There's a little bit of a funeral home aspect to this story, and obviously that's where I drew that comparison. But the fact that there's several members of the family, they all have quirks, they all have different things that they're secretly kind of dealing with in the midst of their family story too. So,
so it's kind of has that feel to it, but it's like we said, it's the memoir, so it's actually like a real thing.
It's real, yeah.
I like half the time I was like, is this her like being hyperbolic or like adding fanciful elements? And I was like, no, I don't think so. It is like the whole book doesn't feel like that, but it just because some of the things that happen. Or like I'll say this, like so we'll just go into it. So the book is about her coming of age and like finding her lesbianism and sexuality and gender identity in the midst of her dad and her family and how their life was when she was growing up, and then eventually her dad's untimely death. So like everything's kind of starts off. You already know like the dad's dead pretty much in the first from the very beginning of it, or like at least by the second chapter for sure. But the first chapter, they're just talking about the dad a lot and like how the family grew up and stuff. So, and it's funny because the dad through this comic, it's non-linear. The way she tells it is a non-linear story. So it's got 7 chapters and each one has like a theme, and like it'll be like the first one was the dad's ostensibly on the outside, it's just about the dad always fixing up the house when she was a kid. Like they had this fancy house that at one time was fancy, but had become...
all of her friends called it the mansion.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really.
It wasn't. Yeah, it was just a dilapidated house that her dad fixed up and always had to fix up stuff. It did make it seem like the dad would like make it nice, though. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't seem like...
Oh, yeah, no, she said he could turn garbage into gold. So,
right.
I mean, although it's black and white comic, like everything, when you see him working on the things, you could tell it was, something was broken, and then the next thing it's a pretty thing on the wall. So
right, and so he was going around, and he would like find junk that matched the house or whatever, and then he would like paint it, fix it up, and all that. So that's like the first chapter is that, like a lot of just like her being around, and you get like a little hint of there's like a darkness in the house, like he's got an anger problem, obviously, and she references like at the very beginning, he's playing airplane with her when she's a little girl, and she said it's one of the few times like we had any like physical touching at all, like in the house. So they're not huggers apparently, or say I love you,
Yeah, and I mean that in particular, like they're playing, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, there's like dirt on the floor. We need to clean this up before we do anything else." And then, "Oh, I found something else to do." And yeah, I mean, they have a moment, and that's it. Like he moves on to like, "We need to clean this place up." And
yeah, there's no father-daughter day. There's father-daughter minutes or whatever. So, and then like, you see throughout the story, like we said, it goes back and forth in a nonlinear fashion. Where each chapter is telling a different section of her life, whether she's growing up and discovering that she's gay, or she's already in college and she has her first girlfriend, or her dad's dead and then she's dealing with that, after. So, and it's kind of like putting the pieces together. And in this book, how did you feel about the like non-linear way it went?
There were a couple times I think I got confused with, just because the artwork artwork's nice. It's like to me it felt like a cross between like Archie comics and Tintin. It was good. Very kind of like old fashioned, but very, and I mean she's a cartoonist, so I get that, but it was nice. I liked it,
and it was all like nice blues and stuff. Like it had good. It kind of reminded me like Parker had a lot. It had the same color palette of Parker, which I was down with. So.
But yeah, there was a few times where, because she's going back and forth with her story when she draws herself, I was like, oh wait, like is this like, it mainly was just jump in time between like, oh, are we like a couple months ahead, or are we a couple weeks ahead? Like, right. It was just kind of things like that. It didn't like ruin the story for me. Like obviously I like just either backtrack or go forward a little. Like, oh, okay, I know where we are.
Yeah, and I felt the same way. I had like a hard time. I didn't think I had a hard time following it. And then all of a sudden, she would say something in a later chapter, and I was like, wait, I thought earlier she had done this or whatever, and the timeline didn't make sense. But it was because she had changed. It was a different day, or like I misread something, or it wasn't clear to me that she had switched like clothes, and it was a different day or something.
Or you said like there's one day that we were supposed to understand that was the day that she wrote the letter, because there was like a typewriter in the scene. I'd missed that on the first like kind of go over, and had to go back and forth a little. But yeah, like I said, it didn't ruin it. It just was like, well, wait, how long ago was this? Wait a minute.
Yeah, like specifically, I had a hard time because at the beginning of the book they say like the dad kills himself, or it's like a mystery whether the dad's killed himself or not. He was working one day, and he was, I guess, moving stuff like back and forth across the street.
Yeah, he's moving stuff from the garden, and he got hit by a truck. And there are elements where it's like, well, maybe he probably jumped technically in front of it, and then there were elements where like, well, this could have happened. Maybe this was literally it just happened, and it's an unfortunate circumstance.
And the way she drew it, like he was always carrying like a bundle of like trees or sticks or whatever, like foliage on the side that the truck's gonna hit him on. So it was like kind of covering his head, so his vision was obscured. So you could see it being like an accident. And then also the driver, though, I think it said once that he said that he jumped, like the dad jumped backwards, and that's why he was in the street. And it was like, well, was he jumping from something? Was there a snake or something or whatever? We don't know. But but she feels like he did commit suicide. That's very clear that she's like, I feel like he did. And she specifically feels like that because she's wondering why, and like the reason why she feels like that is because, or like if it has to do with her, is because she had written a letter 4 months earlier, that said, that where she came out and told her parents that she was gay. And so it's interesting how they allude to, or how they reveal this, because at the beginning, you don't know the dad. The dad is also gay. And so you're like, oh, did the dad like hate her or something? Or like, did it make him like feel a certain way or something? And that's why he wanted to kill himself or something. But then, and you think that's what she's going through, but that's not at all what she's going through as far as that's concerned. I think later on, I think in the last chapter, they kind of show what was going on in his mind more, and like why she thinks he would have killed himself or whatnot. Or like,
yeah, because she makes some good comparisons and things that maybe she didn't notice throughout her life, and she's like, oh, right. It was kind of like a yin and yang thing with my dad.
Yeah, like they make very clear that like they are similar and opposites. Like he grew up in a time where you had to be closeted and he had to be ashamed of everything, and he always like had to keep it a secret that he was gay. And this was one of the things that this is why it was kind of confusing for me, some of his storyline, because he was always in a different career. He was always doing something else. Of all trades. I'm like, motherfucker, you need to stop and get a job that's solid, because none of this, I'm like, because he was, at first he's in the military, and then he's just fixing the house all day long. And then when they actually show his career, he's like, in the second chapter, he's in the funeral home, which is why it's called Fun Home, because funeral home. And then and that's where she's like comparing them to like the Addams Family and stuff, which I thought was cool.
It was a cool little comparison.
And that's also what made it feel a little bit more like Royal Tenenbaums-y or something. Like, are they characters, or is she just saying like it felt like that, but this is actually how we were for real? I wasn't sure if we were supposed to take it at face value or not. Sometimes, but then as it went on, you're like, okay, yeah, it is face value. But at the beginning, I was like, oh, is it like hyperbolic and whatnot, or exaggerated? And yeah, so like, and then the dad, he was a funeral home, and then he was a teacher, and he just did a bunch of shit. It was just, this dude would not pick a goddamn career. And I think that's part of the characters. He was never like able to like get comfortable in his life or settle down, because he was hiding that he's gay and that he's in a heterosexual relationship that he doesn't necessarily want to be in. It's not that he didn't love his wife. And it's weird because they made it seem like he did want to marry his wife. It was like he didn't have to marry her, Yeah. It's like, it's not like you had to, like, there's lots of people that just didn't get married back then. Like, I mean, I know a couple people that are older and they're not married, and they were never like, I don't know if you're gay or not, but like, it's not like expected that you have to get married or whatever. So it was definitely the norm, but if you're gay or whatever, then I guess, it might be talked about or something, like, is he or isn't he? But
I think that was part of it too, is because he was a really, I guess, very well thought of as far as himself guy, because he always was like kind of dressing himself to the nines and really.
I think that was a facade, though. I thought that was like,
But I think that was part of it, is like, so that's why he had a wife who's like, it was like, kind
of, that's how he's supposed to keep up his facade.
I felt like it, that kind of seemed like, and especially like one of the comparisons, especially early on, is that he's dressing himself very, very professionally and kind of, we'll call it like a well-dressed man kind of a look. And then for Allison, he was like, no, you need to wear a beret. Like, you have to wear this beret because it's cute and that's what girls wear.
Right.
You have to wear that dress. So he was very, very much like he was putting that on because of the facade he was putting on, and then also Well, I mean, yeah, that was mainly what.
Yeah, they definitely made it known that he was trying to like express his femininity that he could not express through her.
Yeah.
And she always wanted him to be more like macho or whatever because she had like a masculinity she wanted to express.
That's true, yeah, because she was like, I just, why don't you just give me, I don't need long hair, just give me a bowl cut, I think she said at one point.
Yeah. And she saw like a butch looking woman when she was younger and when she was in a diner with her dad. And she was like looking at her like, what? Like, I didn't know you could dress like that as a girl. And I think she was like a truck driver or something.
Yeah. And she like flannel.
She looked like a hard lady. Like her CB name was Bruiser or whatever. But she was wearing like flannels, like a lumberjack style or something, and like the brawny man basically. And the dad turned around and saw her and said, "What, do you want to dress like that?" And she had to like lie and be like, "No, I don't," or whatever. But she did. So yeah, like I couldn't tell the whole time. I couldn't tell if he actually like loved the mom, or at one time did he love the mom, or was it just always a facade or whatever.
We think at some point. I mean, she had two brothers as well, too. On top of that, so like there was some connection that the parents had, obviously, too. Like,
I guess, or it all could have been a facade.
I guess
they never really solidify whether he actually loved her at one time. They kind of mentioned because when he was in the military, they lived in Europe, and I feel like at least it kind of makes it seem like when they were in Europe, that's when they were in love. And then they could never go back to Europe once they left, kind of thing. And like, so that's like you're stuck in this loveless relationship now that you can't go back to the way it was or whatever.
I can see that too.
Yeah. So that was interesting. Like how his life kind of played out like that. And then,
I think part of it was the mom too, because like she was a teacher as well. She was an English teacher, but she was also Catholic. And so like,
right. And she was actually like the one who was most vocal about Alison being gay.
Yeah,
and that brought up a whole bunch of feelings because once Alison writes her letter, and I like how she did it. Like she was just like, okay, I'm gay. Like I'm officially like in my head, like I know what I am now. I've read enough books and I've like discovered myself enough. Like I know I'm this. And so she like wrote a letter to her parents and mailed it and was like, no big deal, and then got a call from her mom and her mom was like, what? Like it wasn't like her mom was like, I hate you, but it was just like, are you sure?
Yeah, it was. I think it was more because she had to deal with that in the forefront now that also I've been living with my husband who is a gay man.
What it did was, it just brought to the forefront a secret in the family that, okay, now that Alison's so open about being gay, now we're going to have to talk about the dad being gay. And I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because, I've been living with this man. What am I supposed to do? I've lived with this man all my life and now he's gay. Or he's always been gay, but, never enough to, or never, like no one has ever brought it forward and we've never had an open conversation about it. So, like we just like it buried. And so like it kind of brought up all these feelings for the mom. And then also that's like, eventually that's what leads to the mom wants a divorce. And then 2 weeks later, that's when the dad dies. So that's why in her mind, she's like, did I cause my dad's death? Like inadvertently kind of thing. Yeah. And one of the interesting things in this book that I really liked was that the dad and her, they both had like a love of books and literature. And okay, is something I like and I didn't like. I'll say that. I really like this because I like books and I like reading. They got to have a relationship and talk about things they wouldn't necessarily get to talk about under the guise of literature. So like, oh, did you read that Oscar Wilde story where this happened? And it's like, oh yeah. Like, so we're talking about being gay, but we're not actually talking about being gay. Or we're talking about, this or that in our lives, but we're not actually having to talk about that outright. We're hiding it. We're like coding it inside of our literature talk. And it kind of gives us like a way to talk to each other without having to be so forward and like out front and on like open about it.
Yeah.
So I like that about it, because books can do that. Like, you can read a book and be like, oh my gosh, like I learned something about myself, or I really connected with that thing, or I didn't know I felt this way about that issue or something. The other thing that can happen is her dad and her were such literary people that they read all the really hard books, and that's the ones that she really wanted to talk about in this memoir. So if you haven't read James Joyce, like Ulysses, or what, I don't know,
The Odyssey.
No, the Odyssey isn't him.
No, but
I mean, the Odyssey at least is something you can read. I don't know.
yeah,
Everybody knows what the Odyssey is. Like, Ulysses is just a version of the Odyssey. So, but it's James Joyce's weird, annoying, hard to read version of. And I'm going to sound like a big dumb book, not a big dumb non-book reader here, but I will never read James Joyce, and and also, like, she talks about Proust, I don't know how you say it, and like all these writers that you read when you're like getting your master's degree in English, that if you haven't read them, some of this book is definitely lost. Like, even you felt like that, right?
Oh yeah, no, of course. I am not going to sit here and say I understand.
You got it all right.
Her literal references, because we'll get to them, and then she'll even put in like a little short excerpt from one of those passages. And I read it, and then I went back and I reread it, and I was like, moving on.
Yeah, I have no idea.
There were several parts that, like, luckily she put it in context enough to where, like, I understand what she was going for, but I just could not pull that literary reference in to be like, yeah, man, that makes exact sense. I see where she's going with that.
Yeah, a lot of it was like, okay, she gets meaning out of these passages she's putting in this book. Luckily, she is putting them in context of what's going on in the panels around it.
Yes.
Because I'm like, oh, obviously they're connecting about this in that passage, but I don't know what's going on in that James Joyce passage or whatever. So, like, I don't know. I like reading. I just found out that I like Stephen King books or something. Like, I stopped there. I don't go to the, master's degree or doctorate level books where I gotta like have like, my brother once told me, like, you have to read James Joyce with like an appendices, like an extra book that's of someone else who's done all the research for you, so you can understand each page as you go through. I'm like, well, then I'm not going to read two books together. Like, like, if I have to read someone else's interpretation of what the book is about in order to understand that book, probably not going to be I'm just not going to get out of it what you think you're going to get out of it.
And she pulled me in on some of, like, she talked about F. Scott Fitzgerald, and she talked about Gatsby and some of the comparisons.
I was with her with Camus. I've read, a lot of Camus. I've read a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald. He's one of my favorite writers. And Oscar Wilde, I've read, his plays and stuff. But the other ones, those other higher level ones, I was like, oh, good God. Like, I have no idea what they're saying or what they're talking about or what they're referencing. It's so, like, mired in their, like, styles that I wasn't sure. Like, I think if you've read them and you understood that stuff, this book might mean, like, a hell of a lot more to you than it did to me necessarily in some parts, because it was obvious that, like, she's trying to convey some, like, big, like, message that, like, you would see if you understand this famous writing, and I don't understand that famous writing. So yeah, it just made me feel like, okay, apparently I'm a big dum-dum, because I'm not gonna go pull out I'm not going to go look up that quote and figure out what it's talking about. I am not going to
pause and go read.
Yeah,
go read
exactly. I read comics.
The cliff notes on this book.
This is a comic book podcast for a reason. If I was on BookTube or something, I would go read Proust.
I like books with pictures.
Yes, exactly. If the pictures can tell more, do it. All right. So, yeah, like, that was my. It was weird because, like I said, I love books. There are certain books that, like, have changed my life and mean so much to me, and, like, if I was writing a book, I would probably throw those in, or if I was writing a comic about my life, I would definitely have a chapter on the Fountainhead or something, but, like, that's not, like, high literature. It would literally be, talking about how art, as an artist, creating art is, awesome or whatever. Like, everybody can understand that. Like, these passages were way beyond like just you've never heard of, especially if you've never heard of Joyce or something. The guy was at least prepared. Like, okay, Joyce is like a big mire, like it's just a quagmire of, his style, prose, and everything. So I'm probably not going to understand this. I already knew that going into as she's quoting it. So, but yeah, like she, like I said, she did a good job of like, okay, you don't have to read it to get what she's saying, but you have no idea what she's saying by putting that quote in there.
Yeah, she obviously has a greater meaning there that maybe we're not quite getting, but we understand the concept that she's going for.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, she did it with the other authors that I have read, like F. Scott Fitzgerald and stuff. So I'm like, okay, I get that part. But yeah, and then this book is also, just in case anybody, it's got some nudity and stuff in it. So it's because it's about her discovering her sexuality as she's in college and stuff and whatnot. And this is where, like, once she's in college, is interesting because, like I said, the first half of this book made me think that is this some kind of weird like Royal Tenenbaum family or something? Because like everybody's got weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so like when she's younger, because she's in like this very hostile to like openness family, and like everybody's got hiding secrets and stuff, she goes through like a crazy like OCD phase where she's like, I have to like count the stuff on the floor, like the marks on the floor before I can cross the threshold, and I have to like,
oh yeah,
I'm in the bathtub and I have to count the drips, and until there's an even number of drips I can't get out of the bathtub and stuff like that. And that all goes away once she like gets out of the house. Like once she's like in college, she's like, oh cool, like she starts reading, and this was interesting too, she starts reading nonfiction books. So I think that's also like, it was something that they made sure you noticed, was like with her dad, she's reading and talking about these fiction books. And then when she's by herself and she's actually gets to express herself and learn about herself, they're all nonfiction stuff about feminism and lesbianism and sexuality and whatnot. And so it's like everything's out in the open, kind of like like that just represents like, okay.
Yeah, she even got the courage like to go. She went to, it was the gay union, I think. And like she said she was reserved there at first, but even that she started to like, okay, I'm understanding like, I guess my new culture of like,
right,
what I'm going to do in my life and how I'm going to take how I feel about myself and interact with other people with that. And it was interesting.
Yeah, and so It was interesting to see like her growth, and also like in juxtaposition to her dad's non-growth.
Yeah,
because like, as you see it through the book, her life in juxtaposition to her dad is the opposite, like we were saying. So, her dad is gay; he can't be gay, so he's got to hide it, and that leads to all this like frustration and horribleness and all this in his life.
Yeah, there were several students and younger male characters that kind of came and went throughout the story that were obviously partners.
Yes. Like babysitters or just,
for her,
handymen that he knew and stuff that would help around the house.
Help with house stuff, help with babysitting. Oh, this is my student. He's getting some extra stuff. Oh, we're going to go grab a cup of coffee. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And then,
yeah.
So he's got to keep it hidden, which leads to a lot of turmoil in his life. And then, whereas she, because it's a different time, and I'm assuming this was like the 90s or the late 80s when she was coming out. So
like early 90s.
She got to like express herself more, and she got to be comfortable with herself. And there was a lot, like she could go to the library and rent books about homosexuality in the public library, and she didn't seem like she felt ashamed or, I need to hide this or something. And the fact that they even carried them, you can tell it's a different time, because I'm sure in the 70s and the 60s they did not have books on homosexuality unless it was like it's a mental disorder or something in the psychology area or something. But yeah, so it was interesting to see that juxtaposition. How'd you feel about the length of this book?
Well, I think because of the back and forth, and sometimes she would re-point out some of the same things on occasion. It felt a little long by the end. It felt long, The last chapter was good. It was a good wrap up.
The last chapter was the best chapter
by far.
I was like, oh, okay, like I see where she's kind of wrapping stuff up here.
I feel like there's some of the stories where I get what the story she's telling about that she had with her dad, or a life instance that's not like hugely moving like college or whatnot, but like one of the funeral home stuff. One of the things she talked about, like having a weird interaction with her dad, where he asked her for a pair of scissors, and she never went into the embalming room before, and he was like, "Hey, come down, grab those scissors over there for me." And then she got it, and he's like, "All right, see ya." And she's like, "Oh, is there more to that?"
Yeah, she's like, "Is it a rite of passage?"
Yeah, she's like going through her head what it meant, but literally like that was the story.
Yeah,
and like
a lot of things were just like her kind of explaining things that may or may not have been hints or tests from her dad or something about her. So that's why it's like she highlights them, but then they're left for you to figure out, like for you to decide whether they meant something or not.
For me those did move the story. Like some of them were like, oh, that's interesting, but I was like, it didn't really push the story forward.
For me, this could have been 4 chapters or like 3 chapters, and you could definitely take some of that stuff out and just condense it. You could have, instead of having a whole chapter about her dad fixing up a house and how the house was, you could have 4 pages instead of like 30 pages or whatever about that, or I don't know. There's just stuff that I feel like she could have done to tighten it up and also make it, because it wasn't boring. It just I was wondering. You're wondering the whole time, like, what is the point she's getting to? And are there answers at the end of this? Because that's the other thing, is when you have a memoir and it's not like a story that someone's written, it's kind of like listening to a true crime podcast or watching a TV show about a true crime, and they're like, and no one knows what happened. So it's like, God damn it. Like, I am invested in this person's life, and I want to, I want closure on this or that. And because she is still alive and she is just telling a section of her life about her, discovering her sexuality and then her dad's death, eventually, it just kind of leaves certain things, like there's no closure on some of the stuff.
And I will say this too. Part of it I'm sure is that we are 2 straight males who don't quite have that connection to her story of coming to understand herself better.
Potentially. I will say I have read like comics about gay characters or whatever that, or watched movies about gay people that I'm like, oh, I'm fully on board with this story. So I'm not sure. It might be the way that she told it, and she wanted to tell it a certain way, so that's her way to tell it. It just didn't connect with me how she did it.
It's maybe, maybe it also has to do with we didn't get the high literary.
That's true too. We might be a bunch of dum-dums.
It could be because of that.
She's like, how about you read a fucking book, you Neanderthal? But yeah, it felt like there could have been potentially a better way, a cleaner, faster way maybe to tell the story. But I'm not criticizing her on that necessarily. Like I said, it wasn't boring. I was just kind of like always wondering, where is this going? And then always in the back of my head was, is there going to be closure on this? Is there going to be like a oh moment or anything? And there wasn't really. The last chapter had the closest thing to that, which is you get to see like her and her dad interact about, and they actually talk about, it's after she's written the letter and come out, and she is come out to visit them. And this is before, obviously, he's dead. And then obviously it's before the mom has asked for a divorce. So for that 4-month period, she's come out to visit him, and they actually get to, they go see a movie. I think they said it was The Coal Miner's Daughter.
Yeah.
And on the way to the movie, they have like an actual awkward heart-to-heart kind of about him being gay and about her being gay. And you get to see some kind of okay, we both are this thing, and we both kind of realize it about each other, or at least, he realized it about her maybe, and that's why he was giving her certain books she thought after she became gay. And he's like, I always maybe thought this or that, but and then her kind of asking him about his sexuality and how it's been for him. Obviously, he's had a family and stuff, and he's had to keep it secret. So she gets to learn a little bit about how, like, the kind of pain and hardship he's had to go through with that kind of stuff. And it definitely, like, humanizes him more. Because a lot of this book is about him being a bastard. It's like about him being kind of like, I'm fucking all these boys behind my wife's back. And also the wife in this book is just like, she's there, but she's just kind of, she's like, if there was a movie about this whole thing, she would just be drinking wine in the background or something all the time.
Yeah.
Like every shot would have her opening a bottle of wine or something, because she's just like, at least in this book, the way I got her character was she knows, she just has to put up with it. She can't do anything about it, and she feels stuck in this marriage too.
Oh yeah, she's working on her own thing. She's doing it. If the kids come ask her for something, it's something they need to talk to Farrah about. She's like, I don't know, ask your dad, and has her glass of wine and just does her thing.
Yeah, and yeah. So for her, she doesn't have that much in this story going on, other than like every now, like she revealed obviously that the dad is gay and stuff to her daughter. So
yeah, the only real moment she has with her mom is when she after he's passing, like, you pick the book from his collection.
Yeah,
because that's one thing, he does have a large collection of.
He's got like a big library.
Yeah. And they kind of have that little moment there, but for the most part, yeah, she's kind of there.
Yeah, and there wasn't that much closure on stuff. It was kind of good that they got to have what they did in that car, and their ride. And then
I liked when they were talking about towards the end of her college career, and she's doing her what's it called? I'm blanking. Well, she's doing a big essay on Ulysses. Oh yeah, she took like a bachelor's course just on Ulysses or whatever, like a class just on Ulysses. Just on that. And she's like, she's in it. She's like, I got 760 pages left, and I'm not reading more of this right now.
Yeah.
Screw this book.
That's kind of how we felt while reading the Ulysses parts of this book.
And she's talking, and then she ends up having like a conversation with her dad. It's like that. I think the car one and like maybe one other one when she went up with her girlfriend at the time was Joan, I think.
Yeah.
And then she draws those comparisons to her dad's story.
Yes.
To Ulysses and the Odyssey and her life, and then she's finally like, okay, I know how to rush to kind of finish this.
Yes. I also did think that the whole end of the book has like a little, like the last 4 or 5 pages has like a nice little, like, it's like lines from a book that or it might be lines from Ulysses. I don't even know which book it was, but like she was like quoting that, and then it had like, kind of pictures of her and her dad at a pool and stuff. And then that was sweet. It had like a nice, okay, she did have some kind of closure about her dad and his life, whether she felt it was fully, obviously he wasn't able to be who he actually could or should have been in a free, era or whatnot. But at least she had what she got to have with him, which, was by the last chapter, she got to have like she got to be open about it with herself or her own sexuality. And that helped him actually get a little bit of relief towards the end, because he got to be open more about it too.
Yeah, because she said he never really would have had those conversations otherwise.
Yeah. So I can only imagine that was a little bit better. But like I said, there's no closure on whether he killed himself or not, or whether, and also just leaves it at that point where she's like, and the funeral's over. So, you don't see anything further. Is there anything else you wanted to hit?
Like you said, reading through it, like there were a couple points. Like I like the Addams Family comparisons she found early on with her family. Some of her little quirks for herself and her brothers when they were younger, and growing up in the funeral home, and then kind of just their journey in general of how they played off each other. There's one where they like, I think one of their babysitters like tried to teach him how to use a small firearm at one point.
A 22.
Yeah, and they were like,
which I was like, what gun is that? Like, I was like, is that a Ruger? I can't tell.
And they were like, I don't even know. And then that was the snake comparison because they were like, we saw this big snake, and then she was like, oh, maybe my dad saw a big snake in the other side of the road, and that's why he jumped back. And just the little thing those things that she pulled were very interesting, and I really liked those. And then there was one or two little things that I thought were the fun connective tissue, like with her literary prose that she was bringing in was like in particular, she's talking about her girlfriend and how they
get a little explicit.
They get a little explicit, but
in the pictures.
But the thing I'm alluding to, the thing I'm alluding to at it is that her girlfriend had one eye she had one eye and one glass eye, and she said, "Oh, she's like my Cyclops from like it was just like
from the Odyssey,
little things." So I would just I had a little like chuckle from it. I was like, I hope that was I assume that was the
point,
the comical elements that she was trying to get across.
Yes.
Having those little bits.
There was definitely that. Like you could see when she was finally like able to be herself, she was definitely like more fun and having like more fun in her life, obviously. And so there was definitely more humor in those sections. But yeah, if like once again, if you didn't understand or if you didn't know the Odyssey or you didn't know that stuff, it might not have been comical to you. But luckily, we had read at least that book.
At least that one I was probably forced to read.
Yeah. So, or at least you know enough about it to know there's a Cyclops in the book.
Yeah.
The Odyssey. So, yeah. On that note, what would you give this one, John?
So, like you said, there were parts where I got a little confused and I felt it was a little long, but overall I enjoyed it. And like I said, being that I like 6 Feet Under and I like the odd family narrative to it, I would probably say a 6. It wasn't like my favorite story, and I didn't connect to with it as deeply, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me and John originally we had talked about this before, and I was like, I think I'm going to give it a 5, just because like it was something about it that just didn't flow or whatever with me. And like I said, it wasn't. I was like on the edge of being bored sometimes, but I also just kind of I was always wondering like where is this going and is there closure to it? But I think after we talked about it this whole half hour here or whatever, I think I'm going to give it a 6 too, because one, it is groundbreaking. I think for the time it came out in 2006, I think it was definitely groundbreaking.
Oh, for sure. Like now we have a plethora, or we have a growing,
more so, yeah,
growing population of characters in graphic form that are,
or just any form in media.
In media, yeah, that's true, in media, because we're getting everything.
These stories are being told more.
Yeah.
And so this book now, it just feels kind of okay. Yeah, I've heard a similar version of this story, at least in some ways.
But I 100% see how her getting her story out, I'm sure, helped a lot of people.
Yeah, it's like being like if you're a band, like if you listen to Led Zeppelin, and then you hear, Metallica or something, you're like, I don't like. Why would I listen to Led Zeppelin when I can listen to whatever, but like, or maybe the Beatles or something, something old.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, why would I listen to that? But it's like, that's the beginning, like you got to understand why would I listen to jazz when I could listen to prog rock or something? It's like, well, you got to listen to jazz so you know where it came from. So it's kind of like that, where this was like a precursor or like the first or whatever to this was the step on the moon, and then it made a splash and got out there, and then people went, there's an audience for this, or it opened some doors. It showed people.
Someone would want to hear my story too.
Yes.
So
yeah, I could definitely see that. So I changed it to a 6 because I think it was groundbreaking for its time, more so than we're giving it. And I do feel like, the last chapter really kind of, hit it home. Like through the middle of the book, I was kind of like, okay, where are we going with this? Like, what is the point of this book? What is she trying to tell me? And some of it was so mired in like the literature that she's like showing all the prose and everything, all the books that she's quoting from. And it's kind of like, okay, like I don't get that. So what, if I don't get that, what am I going to get from this kind of thing?
Yeah.
And the last chapter really like brought it home for me. Like it was like, okay,
well,
I can relate to this part of it. Like the dad and her.
Yeah. She tied up as much as she could of all of that with her dad. And yeah, you kind of got, it wasn't a resolution per se, but you understood how their interweaving story throughout this, how it made sense.
Yes. And yeah, and it gave it like some kind of a closure and some kind of a purpose to the end of this. Like it gave, okay, this is what we're talking about. This is why I'm including these literary things, because it's how me and my dad talk to each other. And like whenever she reads Ulysses or any of those books, she's going to have all these dad memories and everything and feelings. And, oh, I remember that conversation I had and stuff. So that's kind of a nice wrap up to it. So the last chapter really brought it to a different level or a different rating for me, I guess, too.
Yeah.
But 6 for both of us, I guess.
Yeah.
So on that note, I think next week we're going to read Absolute Carnage.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we're gonna take a step back from the true life lesbian memoir, and we're gonna go push all the way forward into 90s crazy comicness. And our Absolute Carnage is actually, I think it's from Donny Cates, the same writer that did Venom.
Okay, that's fun.
From last week. So it's his, like, after he wrote Venom, he did this whole big event called Absolute Carnage. So I'm excited about that. But
I'm glad we read this one. It was good, and like
it's a good change of pace too. Like it has a good, it's a good story. Like I think people should read this. And like I said, if you've already read Ulysses and all, if you're 21 and you're like, I've read all this stuff because I'm in college, and
definitely read this.
Read this book. You'll probably get a lot more out of it because you understand all the references she's making. And once again, we're a bunch of big dum-dums here. So
yeah, and if you want to read a really good story in celebration of Pride and kind of like see, maybe you don't want to read like a new superhero aspect, but you want to have see that in this kind of literary form, this is a great one to pick up. I mean, this is award-winning. This is and the art is great in this one.
Yeah, the art is great in this.
And she did everything. She wrote it and she did the art. So I mean, it's overall
the quality of the book is fine. It's fantastic. So, just some of the stuff I got a little bogged down in where I was supposed to focus and kind of stuff. But yeah. On that note, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, feel free to email us at planestrains.comicbooks at gmail.com.
Yeah, don't forget to check out our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube channel. We've got them all out there, and got our whole back catalog as well.
And I guess we'll see you guys next week.
See you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, folks, hope you enjoyed that episode.
If you did and you'd like to follow us on social media, our Facebook is Planes, Trains, and Comic Books, and our Instagram is @Planes, Trains, and Comic Books, all one word.
And be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more recommendations to add to your weekly pull list.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.